and I look forward to sharing with you the fascinating and sometimes tragic histories of the paintings which I have met during more than 40 years in my career as a conservator. I'm a German painting conservator working since 20 years in Asia. All the slides you see are paintings I restored in my studio with my colleagues. I have prepared a lecture to meet the needs of a general audience, being art lovers, perhaps collectors, rather than a scientific discourse on specific categories, research, and the more theoretical aspects of our profession. Our task as conservators is to restore paintings and artworks on paper with proficiency and competence. Above all, we try to make sure that damage and loss of value do not occur. Through consultations and public presentations, we inform all who work with art how pictures should be safely kept, cared for, and transported. Most cases of damage can be avoided by specific prevention. I've prepared a lecture. The following film uses a time-accelerated technique to show movements in the structure of paintings provoked by perpetual changes in climate conditions. Delaminations in the structure of the painting last only 3 to 4 seconds in the simulation, whereas in reality they took up to 36 hours. Let's have a dramatic peek at an insider's view how, in this span of time, aging takes place. one hand, it is historical in the sense that it is a human creation realized at a fixed point in time. On the other, it comes to us across a span of time that has elapsed since its creation and can never be erased. This span of time acts upon the materials used in creating the image. In the case of a painting, certain transformations occur naturally over time that are totally irreversible. What you see now are several before and after conservation. No conservation can ever hope to re-establish the original state of a painting. It can only reveal the present state of the original materials. Even if restoration could determine the original state, it would still be impossible to abolish the historicity of the work, the span of time it has crossed to appear before us. Later on, I will explain the entire process of some of these cases. Thousands of paintings have been destroyed by shipwrecks, wars, and fires. Others have reached the present day in such bad condition that they can only serve for documentary purpose. Fortunately, a large number of old paintings have preserved their appearance and still enchant us despite the effects of time. Art must be preserved in the best state possible, not only for future generations, but so it can represent its historical period more meaningfully. The concept of preventive conservation incorporates all actions and procedures that aim to prolong the lifespan of a painting by slowing down its natural or accidental deteriorations as much as possible. Proper care and preservation of paintings require a set of actions specific to each object and to its environment. Manuscripts and treatises on paintings from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance have certainly bequeathed us a few recipes concerning the restoration of easel paintings. But it was only in the 17th and especially in the 18th centuries that the first specialized early studios appeared, first it seems in Italy and France. In the 19th century, when most of the museums of Western Europe were created, restoration came into its own, and collections of recipes and advice dealing with the care of paintings were published. And up to the end of the 18th century, archival documents and literary sources in this area were relatively rare. It was not until 1850, when hundreds of paintings appeared in France, all requiring urgent care at the same time, that restoration took off abruptly. I started my conservation restoration studio 35 years ago in Hamburg, Germany, after being trained at the Staatliche Museum of Berlin, which was the first museum laboratory established for restoration back in 1888. I was later employed in the conservation studio of the famous collection of the Hessisches Landesmuseum Darmstadt, a painting gallery with objects dating back to medieval age, as well as showing contemporary collections. For over 25 years, I conducted a conservation studio with up to 50 co-workers and students who went on to study techniques of conservation and restoration. My background is in the European philosophical tradition. That the history of art is a humanistic discipline, that the value and historical development in the most original sense of mankind has to be kept alive and present in the consciousness of future generations. Since the Renaissance in the 16th centuries, objects of art were restored, reconstructed, and broken or lost parts were added. And each century reconstructed according to the taste of the period. The origins of historic preservation are linked with those of the modern historical consciousness, which matured towards the end of the 18th century. The word preservation, in the broadest sense, being equivalent in some cultures to conservation or restoration, can be considered from this point of view as expressing the modern way of maintaining living contact with cultural works of the past. As art was kept mostly in sacred places, like churches and monasteries, or in royal collections, the context of the objects determined the approach. The recognition of the value of the historical pieces led logically to the consideration of how to preserve them according to the significance and social circumstances in which the object was used. The governing motive for protection against damage was religious. One could hardly call this restoration or conservation. In manuscripts and letters from 1626, a letter by Peter Paul Rubens, written while he was an envoy in Spain, relates his restoration of the collection of paintings from churches extensively damaged by dampness and mold during their transport from Italy. The religious context has a connection to the history of art in Asia, where art began as an expression of ritual activities. The decay of art objects was considered natural because art was only temporary and ephemeral. This kind of philosophy of life emphasizes as more important that the significance of ancient objects should remain in our memory, rather than in the philological reconstruction of their original appearance. And it is only in the last 50 years that Asian paintings are being seen in a historical context with a need to be preserved as testimonies of living cultural heritage. I'm sorry. With this matured so-called modern historical consciousness of maintaining living contact with cultural works of the past, the interest in restoration arose. As there is no tradition in professional guilds and no underlying guidelines or consensus on fundamental ethical principles, conservation and restoration as it was transformed in Europe over the last 400 years, the idea of respecting the uniqueness of the cultural property, its artistic, historic, scientific, spiritual, or religious significance in relating context has not yet fully matured. Only in the past few years, there is a deeper scientific research on the approach of how to restore paintings in Asia. And the dialogue about the aesthetic criteria has varied over time and still does today. Here is where the conservator steps in. You see two of my students, one young lady in Germany and two of my Asian students in full gear working on artworks. And me doing research with a microscope on an eye. The conservator steps in to balance the knowledge of the chemicals and technology of the painting, such as binding materials and colors, with the aesthetic appearance and knowledge of historical significance. A painting by Renate Kant, a very famous Indonesian painter, painted 1828. We are removing all layers of overpaint which over the different years in decades were applied and disfigured the artwork of course, there were tremendous damages underneath. So de-restoration is one of the main first steps which have to be conducted before further integration and stabilization can happen. De-restoration as well. Relining was removed. This is the reverse side of the canvas, and thin layers of gauze were attached to stabilize the cotton weaving. An acidic board on an oil painting here is removed with a heating pistol and a scalpel. And on the right hand side, the young man is removing strips by strips thick relining, which was glued behind a famous painting in Indonesia, and pulled the whole original canvas into distorted molded forms. Again, a painting which is heavily damaged due to, of course, aging and wrong handling, but all the damages were covered with opaque layers of thick acrylic, and it was torn apart from the structure, and de-restoration has to happen to remove everything which is not original. The same painting. Underneath, of course, severe damages. You see the putty, the infill from previous attempts to restore, and then this opaque layer which covers it, which doesn't change the composition. De-restoration on a 2-meter 20 painting, 220 years old, which we in India, it's latest movement. And on the painting mentioned 47 cuts. If you come closer later, you can see them. They are triangular cuts. They are, as here, when my colleague Subash is working, horizontal cuts, and those cuts split the painting open. It was quite archaeological. You could hear the scraping. In my 60 years of working with ancient art, I have observed that there is a much quicker decay of paintings in this region than in Europe. This is due to the extreme stress impacts of the climate, mold, light, damage, high and low moisture, pests, and the manner in which collections are kept. Let's now have a look at how a painting needs to be examined before special recommendations for conservation steps are made, and the various elements which can cause damage. Because the time is over when cleaning was apt to be done with a potato or onion or water. Before each treatment, a responsible conservator writes a damage and condition report based on careful examination of the painting. Then it must be determined what needs to be researched as a preliminary scientific examination. Specimens then can be sent to a physics or chemistry laboratory for the identification of binding, pigment, paint layers, or overpaint. A cross-section of paint layers on an altar, a panel, you see on the wooden panel different layers of paint, malachic paint, and another layer which is clay, and then more mineral-based layers. It's a Baroque panel, and the slide is done 140 times enlargement under the microscope. It's a panel under UV light, again a cross-section 140 times enlarged, where you can see the different layers of underpaint, binding agents, and the pigments applied. And here you see all the resinous coatings, which were, the pointer is not so precise, which were applied in layers. So when conservators try to work on a certain special time, if they want to remove the 19th century, they need this research to find out what was the first and authentic paint layer which was applied to the object. Little windows on the left-hand side, cleaning a painting and doing research on a painting from 1953 by German painter Katz in the German Museum, Miss Mary. Miss Mary came to us in a complete state of disfiguration because her whole new body was covered with an opaque layer of paint. The reason for this layers of paint was that she had very early drying cracks. Later I will explain why. It was a choice of the material. And here under UV light you can see that all the black the paint film, and as they were not only overpainted but they were infilled with putty, the thick layers were no longer translucent and she was severely disfigured. This is a painting after conservation on the right hand side. Specific damages and what are the elements that cause damage to a painting? When is conservation required, and what can a collector do to prevent such damages? That's a very important question for everybody who is collecting art. Much can be done with small improvements in the everyday care given to collections by everybody. Major damages to paintings include mold, because fading and mold disfigures objects. A painting, even in a public collection of the National University in Singapore, which shows so severe active mold growth here. You see the white spores settling on the dark paint. A painting which traveled in a container from China, a young oil painting, 20th century. All the white spores are living biodeterioration fungus. This is a detailed, partly removed mold. Additional dangers to paintings include cracks and distortions which deform and weaken them. Cracks and distortions have several reasons. There can be climatic reasons, but very often these are handling damages or overstretching a painting or not supporting the tacking edge. Another cracking, tacking edge where the paint is already delaminating. Surface dirt and light damages. This is not only surface dirt. This is an oxidated varnish which is caused by sunlight. So after 40 years organic varnishes are disfiguring and getting a brownish tonality, and this Baroque painting shows very clearly the aging due to light. Another dramatic light damage with surface dirt. Insects and rodents can eat and soil paintings.
Very often we have even scratches, termites, and then not only in the stretcher but in the painting. Ignorance and human negligence. You hardly can call this preservation, because stapling the work together and not stabilizing all the soiling paint layers here is quite an ignorant way to keep an original painting. A painting which was covered by wall paint in a mansion house during the communist times in Germany. It was in a certain way ignorant to put layers and layers of newspaper in front with aqueous as a water-based glue. And of course a lot of delamination of the original paint happened. And here you can see we removed the wallpaper, and we removed the glue and cleaned the surface, stabilized it first. But it was not pure ignorance. The painting had to be hidden during the communist times. Pulling a painting from the stretcher is pure ignorance because it damages severely the tapping edges. And packing it not with glassine or non-sticky paper means that very often the packing paper is sticking on the surface. It melts into the oil content and into the varnishes, and often it is very difficult to remove, and and stains and damages will stay. Bullets traveling through paintings are a damage we experience as well. And further damages are unprofessional consolidation trials and errors, which can have severe and often irreversible stress impacts. Somebody glued the beautiful drawing by Strasser on the left-hand side on an acidic board, and this acidic board had to be very carefully manually removed. A painting by the Taiwanese painter Tavan Duchesne in 1963. It has a severe damage in the central part of the image. Later I show you the image again. And somebody nailed just a triangular support on the Masonite board. It was created on Masonite. You see even nails were hammered in from the front to close the hole. A painting by Noble, painted 1898 for the Raffles Hotel in Singapore, and all the little islands we draw with chalk are sections of overpaint. There was no reason to overpaint it so vividly, but somebody decided to beautify or to change the composition. And we have again a light damage. You can see how dark the canvas, the varnish was. It is a snowy landscape underneath. This is a light damage. Unprofessional consolidation, of course, is when you tape the edges and the soiling of the surface of all those pigments is not stabilized. Over-cleaned and abraded paintings down to the base are tragic. This Baroque painting you saw a detail before has all the residues of paint remover still on it. You can see the dripping paint remover, and it is over-cleaned up to the red Baroque base. I would now like to discuss and show examples of the following factors which affect the conditions of paintings: materials used, light impact, relative humidity and temperature, pollution, pest damage, handling. Different materials make up different painting agents, and each reacts in its own way to the environment. some paintings are more vulnerable to specific environmental factors. For example, paintings worked on wood or on ivory, which is a very sensitive material to fluctuations in relative humidity. Certain colors, such as crimson lake, are especially affected by light. Large paintings, this was a painting from a ceremonial hall which was not to be removed without two tubes, two rigid rollers, and only then we could work on it, rolling it from the left to the right side, are much more difficult to move, and therefore they are much more susceptible to damage than smaller paintings. And the absence of a frame or even a stretcher, here we haven't had a frame or a stretcher, as in the case of some contemporary works as well, makes moving these paintings even riskier. The heavier a work of art is, the more careful one must be when hanging it. I will show you now a little animation of a painting we restored in Malaysia by a Malay artist, Ibrahim Hussein. It is 9 meters long. We went 4 times to Malaysia, and it was not rolled. When bringing it into a conference hall, when hammering it towards the wall, it had many severe damages which needed serious stabilization. The abrasion which happened are serious damages because we had loss of composition. Not only in the monochrome background, we have loss of composition, unfortunately, within the lines and the more graphic part of the painting. Here you can see very prominently how the abrasion reduced within the lines of the composition the original substance, and here we have paint loss which severely disfigures the composition. Dust and dirt can become seriously embedded in the impasto of unvarnished paintings. This is a painting by Katz again from 1952. We were not able to clean this painting because pollution already was embedded and migrated into the paint layers, and the painting was in a certain way aging, which was irreversible. So in collections in very industrial areas like in Birmingham, now conservators are protecting the surface of paintings with acrylic sheets if a spacer is provided. You see again Miss Mary, which you saw before, because the specific choice of materials which was used by the artist caused an individual aging process. For example, thick oil color on thin canvas without base causes warping and flaking. Slow oxidation of greasy paint, this is the case here, causes wrinkles and damages. You see all the drying cracks. The drying cracks in a painting by Walter Spies, painted around 1950 on the left-hand side, and the cracking as a thick oil material was applied to a board, and you can see how the board reacts with the paint film and the base. Lighting. Light and heat accelerate the natural degradation process. The harmful effects on some objects due to prolonged exposure to sunlight can be witnessed daily. Light can cause colors and varnish to alter, and fabrics and paper to become more fragile. I show you now 5 examples how varnish has aged by light and how colors have faded. This drawing had a matting and alizarin crimson, which was not covered, this part which was not covered by this matting, faded tremendously as no UV protecting acrylic or museum's glass was applied on the painting's side. The impact of light is often undetected, and the colors of an object can fade without a loss in their original vividness being noticed. There are different types of problems related to lighting. Light levels, the pressure of ultraviolet radiation, and the release of heat. The two royal portraits, 18th century, had light damages due to the oxidation of the varnish and fading of the red and the green hues. Control the light level. The light level represents the amount of light that reaches an object. Its unit of measurement is a lux rather than the watt, which is a unit used to measure the amount of energy produced by a light source. Light levels are measured with a lux meter. The second consideration related to lighting is the presence of ultraviolet radiation or UV light. Sunlight, fluorescent lighting, and most halogen lights emit UV rays. These rays are high in energy and can damage paintings. Because UV rays play no useful part in lighting objects, it's recommended that they have to be eliminated by UV filters or windows or framing. Control the heat. A third consideration related to lighting is that of heat. Incandescent light and sunlight produce a lot of heat, and too much heat dries out organic materials and accelerates their aging. Control direct sunlight. Natural light is pleasant, but its intensity varies with the seasons, the weather, the time of the day. And natural light is tedious to control because it requires constantly opening and closing of blinds and curtains and switching the electricity on and off depending on the intensity of the natural light. Paintings should never be exposed to direct sunlight. To prevent light damage, therefore, it's important to eliminate ultraviolet radiation to reduce the light levels. In Asian countries, it's very important to control the exposure time to light. So this means maintain darkness in storage areas if the humidity is properly controlled, and to turn the lights out when no one is in the room. Light damage is said to be irreversible. Relative humidity and temperature. Humidity variations cause familiar phenomena. Some variations in humidity are slow and accompany a change of season. Others happen suddenly and occur daily. Humidity variations are often related to a change in temperature. In Asia, many houses have air conditioning. Bringing paintings in and out of air conditioning creates a huge stress impact to each painting. When paintings are traveling in Europe with climate cases, they go into special rooms to adapt to the new climate and very slowly are adjusted if they are going into a climate change atmosphere. The concept that is referred to when speaking of humidity is that of relative humidity, or RH. This is defined as the percentage of water vapor contained in a given volume of air relative to the maximum amount the air can hold at a given pressure and temperature. Relative humidity can vary between 0 to 100%. The air is considered to be dry when the relative humidity is below 35%. It's considered moderately humid between 35 and 65% and is considered to be humid at over 65% relative humidity. Within a given space, relative humidity varies with changes in temperature. In Asia, for example, the average relative humidity is about 80%. It can be 90 or even higher when it is the rainy season. Paintings made of organic matter are best maintained, and this is very important, at 45% to 60% relative humidity, measured with a humidity measuring thermometer. Paintings made of organic matter are best maintained, that's what I said, by 45 to 60, and paintings conducted on wooden panels and even on ivory are much more vulnerable, and they react much more abruptly to fluctuations in relative humidity. When an object's environment is changed, the objects must be allowed to acclimatize slowly to avoid flaking, cracking, and breaking. Simple measures can effectively slow the impact of humidity fluctuations, and these include placing a backing board on a painting, or placing the painting under glass or acrylic sheet, but only when the environment is controlled and only if there is a spacer in between the glass or acrylic sheet and the original surface, so that no material is touching the surface. Take special care when mounting and framing works that are sensitive to relative humidity fluctuations. Avoid restaining hygroscopic materials. They should be allowed to react freely to variations in humidity. And design the frame so that the wooden support is free to move. The frame has to be able to extract. And the frame which is too tight causes fracture to warp. Relative humidity above 70% can trigger mold growth, especially in dark areas, in areas with little air circulation. And mold is an important topic in tropical countries, so bear with me to speak about this. Molds are living organisms of which the spores, the seeds, are in the air everywhere. This means mold is airborne. It flies if you have one infested object to the other one. These spores will only start to grow when there is enough moisture in the air and on the surface where they land. They prefer places where there is very little air movement or light. You know this from your closet, if it's dark and closed. They will only go on growing if that surface is coated with or contains organic materials on which the mold can feed. And only so long as the high moisture levels are maintained. If you reduce the moisture, the mold will collapse. Though it shrinks and can be brushed off when dry, the root system remains in the objects as a stain, and this is a critical aspect. A painting is done in egg tempera, where the mold ate all the green pigments. You have only small residues of original light and darker green pigments. Here you have the base. It's not abrasion, it's a mold damage. The mold spores love to eat the organic egg tempera substance, and the painting was severely reduced. On the left-hand side, you see a typical mold growth damage where the mold spores are feeding on the paint materials, on the glue, it's on organic glue they love to chew on, and it creates, we call it foxing, brown spots, which are irreversible. A painting, a Chinese painting by Zhu Minzhong, where you see all the greenish parts of the face show mold damage. The little white spots are loss of pigments, because the artist used a coating, a resinous coating with oil, and the mold is feeding on this resinous coating. Severe mold damage, which is irreversible, then we recently had those paintings in the studio. You see that the pigments are completely eaten, the white spots are mold damage, and the white spots as well, and the paintings were completely devalued. If an object is contaminated, use of chemical gas infusion might help, but only if the object is kept in controlled environment after the treatment. There is still no guarantee that a new infection will not occur. And again, as mold is airborne, it's an uphill battle which you can never win if you are not controlling the environment. Temperature also affects the condition of objects. High temperatures accelerate the rates of chemical degradation, oxidation. The yellowing of varnishes, for example, occurs more rapidly at 25 degrees Celsius than at 18 degrees Celsius. Oxidation of varnishes. Therefore, paintings in Asia already show a yellow varnish after a very short period. Remember that temperature is also important because of its direct influence on relative humidity. For each degree Celsius that the temperature is lowered, 3% is gained in relative humidity. Pollutants. Nowadays, air pollution is seriously damaging the environment. Pollutants, for example, dust of all kinds, nitrogen oxides, sulfur compounds, accelerate deteriorations. The painting was kept as a portrait from the 18th century of a Danish queen painted by Yule. It was kept in a museum's environment, and this is pure pollution, although it was in a small German town where no serious industrial pollution actually was happening. Buildings are not airtight, so these pollutions can enter and pose a threat to paintings in the collection. Very often paintings with very polluted reverse sides come, and on the canvas is settling dust and dirt and accretions from insects. This is a polluted surface due to sod. A central heating in a church was not clean, and the painting collected on the surface all this tar condensate. Effective filters can be installed in the air ventilation system to trap some gases and small particles, but the condition of the filters have regularly to be changed and to be monitored. Once these precautions have been taken, the concentration of pollutants will be greatly reduced. Pests. Although those animals are a necessary part of our ecological system, insects and other pests can be destructive to our paintings. If an infestation occurs, many objects in a collection could be shot overnight. I indeed saw this, that termites attacked a little black and white house in Singapore and threw a beautiful drawing which was glued on plywood. Actually, this alone was a destruction, but the termites shoot it overnight. If an infection occurs, many objects in a collection could be shot, torn or soiled. thus reducing their value and their potential for research and making them unsuitable for display. Past damage to a collection is irreversible. It's therefore essential that it is prevented. Of the hundreds of thousands of insect species, only a small percentage attacks objects of art. Wood objects, wood borers, insects are of course very often settling in boards and in the stretchers and in the strainers, and once they attack, they're eating the canvases as well. Insecticides or strong fumigants such as methyl bromide or ethylene oxide are chemical products generally very effective in killing pests, but at the same time they are very dangerous to human health. Framing and handling. A frame's function is not only aesthetic. It's also important for preventive conservation, very important. It allows us to move a painting without touching the paint layer or support. A frame with relief molding protects paintings that have thick impastos. And I will show you now some examples of damages due to faulty framing. Before framing the canvas and tacking, the canvas and the tacking edge has to be properly prepared. We are here using handmade, non-rusting nails, and we are protecting the heads of the nails with anti-acidic paper. The tacking edge needed consolidation, stabilization, because this Baroque painting was very often remounted, demounted, remounted, and the paint layers were flaking. Even more worse damage tacking edge from a painting from the museum's collection in Singapore due to moisture damage. A tacking edge which shows how ferociously these impacts are for artworks if you hammer them again and again on a new stretcher. All these damages here are done from demounting and remounting. This is then a professional mounting. The painting already got a second tacking edge. I will explain this later. A frame may itself be a work of art. This is a frame from the 18th century where we did a color research, actually research through the layers of gilding and bronze, and here you see the replenishing reconstruction of the ornaments. And a frame by Donald Friend, who's well known in Sri Lanka. He loved to paint his frames as well, and it's a part of the composition. It's a piece of art as well. Avoid placing a painting directly on the floor, especially if its frame features relief motifs. However, if you must rest the painting on the floor, place it on padded blocks, on pieces of anti-skid foam, or take a piece of paper or bubble foil to protect the outer edges. Many paintings are held in their frames by means of nails, hammered diagonally through the stretcher and the frame. This method of fastening is not recommended because it subjects the painting to shocks and vibrations from hammering, and it complicates the procedure should the nails from the frame should be removed. If a painting is already held in place by nails, leave them in place. If it's absolutely necessary to remove them, be extremely carefully, because a false move can tear the canvas. You see that the nails even migrated through. this is a frame from the painting I showed before in India by Johann Sopani, which we restored, the painting we restored, and later you have the opportunity to look at the whole process of restoration, but it was my main effort, although there was not enough money, the funds were limited, that the precious frame from 1787 needed a conservation, at least a cleaning and a stabilization. The backing board and relining methods. All paintings and canvas should be provided with a backing board. That's so important because you can prevent damages from accidents during handling. A backing board also strengthens the sometimes unstable structure of a stretcher, if a stretcher is moving and is flimsy. Therefore, it reduces stresses and the risk of a painting bending during handling. It prevents dust and dirt to solve all the pollution from the reverse side from settling on the back of a canvas, and it protects from sudden fluctuations of relative humidity. A loose lining behind the original canvas might be just as useful in specific cases. In cases of severe damage and weak original canvas, a relining might be chosen, but very rarely we are recommending this because it's a very interventive measure already. Loose lining on a stretcher, loose lining, that's the white, cotton cloth, and reline tagging edges on a proper stretcher, and a loose lining on a bigger structure. This painting was received on a heating table by Hendra Gunawan from Indonesia, a new lining, because it could not support itself. Handling. Before moving a painting, it's careful to ensure that it is handled without danger. So you have to study the sturdiness of the frame. You have to study whether the joints are holding well, how securely the painting is attached to its frame, and whether a backing board is present. In addition, make sure that any inner frame or liner is solidly fixed to the main frame, and that the keys are well attached to the stretcher, that they're not falling behind, they are causing damages. Before an extremely endangered painting is allowed to be handled for traveling to an exhibition or to the studio of a conservator, it has to be handled carefully, and I show you now an example of preventive conservation before handling an object. Here we are gluing with little pieces of non-acidic torn Japanese paper with fish glue, a surface of a painting which later needed work on the reverse side. And another example of preparing an oversized painting to be mounted on a customized trainer, and this one needed to be transported. It's a panel from the 18th century. All the paint was flaking, and before handling we pasted those little bandages with fish glue to secure the paint film. An oversized painting will be mounted here on a customized trainer, and I will show you how it got tears supported with thin bridges from synthetic foil, mounted with reversible glue, before even handling it and thinking about mounting it. It's an acrylic thermoplastic glue which you can always release with heat again developed in Switzerland, and this is a heating spatula where you can regulate the temperature and seal the material on the surface. Wear white cotton or surgical gloves when moving gilded frames or unframed paintings. In most of the collections in Asia, the outer edges within the images are severely soiled if it is a light background by handling damages, because the sweat and the dust and dirt and humidity of the hands migrates into the paint layers, and this is an irreversible damage. I show you some examples of student apprentices. He is holding a painting precisely with his gloves, and she is doing it wrongly because she, although she is wearing gloves, is touching the painting's image side. So never carry a painting by holding only the top of its frame. Rather hold the painting by the two sides of the frame, or support it by holding the bottom of the frame with one hand and one side with the other hand. Hold paintings vertically with the paint layer facing you. This is one of the first things I'm teaching apprentices, to turn the painting, carrying it and caring for it by turning it towards your body, facing you. Have two people carry large or heavy paintings and use carts to move bigger paintings. Before dusting, examine the painting in detail to make sure that the paint layer is not flaking. To dust the painting or frame in good condition, use a shaving brush. Be very careful by brushing the work, because often they have impastels, or use any other soft brush created from natural bristles. Please avoid feather dusters. Many housewives are filling their works with feather dusters because the quills can scratch the painted surface. Also avoid cloth or chamois that can catch the impastels or can catch on the ornaments of the frame. And please never attempt to clean a painting or to remove a stain from it. Even water and solvents must only be used by specialists. Never apply any product to the surface of a painting. In conclusion, I would like to show you briefly some examples of paintings where intensive conservation restoration was needed due to the various damages, as I have discussed before thus far. Not only the aesthetic appearance is improved, but the value of each painting is immensely increased. Professional restoration is always a good investment. You saw this painting before, a family portrait. It was rolled. Obviously, it had vertical cracking. It was rolled for quite some time. Painted 1830 in Germany. The painting on the table. You see again the little patches to secure the paint layers. And you see previous hands who tried to infill, to clean. These are old infills. These are putty layers which should cover very unprofessionally the loss of paint. And around the eye you see a huge overpaint. And then the painting, after stabilization, got a loose lining, it got a new stretcher, it got infill only in the missing parts. And this is a painting after retouching. The little boy has a crossover eyesight. A prominent work of Indonesian heritage. We worked in the Arman Museum in Bali. It was found somewhere under a bed by the famous painter Raden Saleh, an Indonesian painter who traveled from Indonesia end of 19th century to Germany, traveled back and forth. And this is a portrait of a Javanese couple and you can easily see the different damages, the torn tapping edges, the rolling, pleats, soiling, abrasion, and tears and torn sections. First, consolidation by unskilled hands, and on the right hand side we are putting already little inlays into the losses with the heating spatula. You saw this before, the soiling paint layers, the staples, and here it is relined. All the different layers which were not original are removed. The putty, before and after conservation, not yet mounted. This is an unusual case. It's called The Hardship of the Farmers by a Philippine painter, Carlos Botón Francisco. It's oil on canvas, silver 1960, and the painting is not finished. So the lower part shows the grid, and as it was not finished, somebody decided he wanted to integrate this lower part with the other image and applied thick layers of dust and dirt, actually soil, as binding medium. He or she chose glue, organic glue, and this strong medium created traction cracks and covered the original with soil as well as the underpaint. Completely disfigured. You even see that he worked with a rusty tin which he placed on the painting. I'm removing this, partly removed here, partly removed here, and the painting after conservation. It's a historically very important painting for the Philippines. Recently we've worked on a specific challenge, a 22 square meter Hindu mythological scene on a thin cotton cloth found in the residence of the last prince of Bali. It was commissioned by the king of Bali, the artist Kobot, painted it 1952, and he's still alive. And this painting was hanging in a tree as a ceremonial cloth. Then it was used to cover the car of the prince. It was poured out in the rain, it was brought back, it suffered tremendously, and one day the Dutch wife of the king decided, oh, we have to take better care, and she took it into her home. She cut it with the artist into two pieces. This is the upper part hanging in the dining room, and this is the way they tried to stabilize it with a little strainer or the dust and dirt. They nailed through it, and we joined it in a studio in Bali with my first students many years ago when I gave a workshop in Bali. You see it has already relined tacking edges here, and you see that we are still consolidating other parts. We created a properly constructed stretcher, a real stretcher, which got a loose lining on the right-hand side to stabilize the work. All the abrasion from the shares of the family always sitting and rubbing towards the painted tempera here were retouched. And the missing parts where the rodents and mice were eating through the canvas were replaced with inlays. Here you see the inlays. And here you see this detail after conservation. "25 square meter. An iconic painting for Singapore by Lu Kang, 1951, oil on canvas by Lu Kang. He died. You see the little patches to secure the paint layers, already partly infilled. flaking. The artist's wife sewed patches behind from rice sacks. Here are Chinese rice sacks. She wanted to keep this important painting. We removed all those additional stabilizing attempts which were not sufficient, and the artist became colorblind. He died with 92 years. We had to ask him whether he was agreeable that we could remove all the different retouchings he did within the blue and within the red, because he changed the composition and it was his painting. So we could only remove certain retouchings after getting his green light. Signed on the reverse side, so therefore no relining would ever be allowed. We relined a tacking edge on the left-hand side. A wrong inscription from the museum, somebody with a felt pen put an inventory number on it. That should never happen. A loose lining behind only to close the canvas, and then removing of overpaint, severe overpaint, infill, retouching, and the artist himself after the painting was finished. Amosolo, the national painter of the Philippines, portrait of Anita McMicken. She is the founder of the Ayala Museum, so it was a very famous painting. Before transportation, again the little bandages to secure and stabilize the paint layers. And it was a tragic example how many hands already tried with brown putty, with white putty to fill loss. Green putty in the dress. This is not the pattern, this is putty, and all the brown putty here. So again, where we started with the lecture, de-restoration took 30% of our time, and here she is after de-restoration, stabilization, retouching. Here you see us in full swing. Oh, sorry. And this is a Indian team where the Goethe Institute sponsored skills upgrading, and you saw the Calcutta Sofani painting in details when my colleagues were working on it. If you still have the time and if you're still motivated to take more in, then you can listen now and see a very well documented short documentary of the restoration of the painting by Johann Sofani, painted 1787, an enormous challenge for the team because they always only worked on small Bengali paintings, and had to take on with me this challenge, going through all the different steps of conservation needed, and I've went 4 times to India. It was enormous inspiring for me, and the result was wonderful what we could achieve. I haven't seen the painting now for 3 years, but one day I will go and look again. Thank you very much for being so patient, and if you have any questions or problems, I'm here to answer them. Can you repeat this, please?
Yeah. You mentioned that we shouldn't apply anything in the front for the painting.
I mentioned that a layman should never apply anything on the front, on the surface on the original surface on a painting. No application like glue, cleaning agents, even potatoes or onions or bread. You should better not touch it. You should better ask the conservator, because each painting has a different technology and different layers of paint and base. And we say where somebody already stands, the next one cannot step in. Once there is irreversible glue already applied, and the paint layers, for example, have deformation, and we cannot remove this. The previous intervention already caused more damage than it is doing good.
Who knows what he's doing, it is permissible to apply some.
Well, if somebody is trained in conservation, of course it's a very needed intervention, but please consider always less is more. And we differentiate clearly between non-interventive and interventive conservation. Very often we only stabilize and no deep intervention is done to prevent further damages and to prevent new material to be introduced to the work.
Okay. Thank you.
Leading from what you just said about new materials being introduced, I was wondering how successfully can you ensure when you're doing retouching of a painting that the materials you use for retouching age similarly to the original materials of the painting?
They can never age similarly because they are new.
Yeah.
They will age, and the aging will be according to the material's properties. If you are using materials to integrate damages aesthetically, please use materials which are reversible. There's nothing else to say. Materials which are reversible. For example, a synthetic varnish on an acrylic painting which you spray on is never reversible. It has a certain aging. It will react to humidity, moisture, temperature, but it's not reversible, or only with severe chemical intervention. So the material you use for retouching, for infill, has to be reversible. No car putty, no synthetic glue, no quick bonding. Which material are you looking at specifically?
No, I was just fascinated by the whole process, and I was wondering, since it's about restoration, how long would that kind of retouching, allow the painting to be viewed without that in itself becoming a problem, the differential aging?
Retouching itself ages, as I said, according to the material. And as you asked for the time span, the retouchings are changing. We have no stable retouching where you can't see after a span of time that this is a retouching. So in European museums, very often I found it irritating when I saw it years and years and years before. The retouchings were done lighter, in a lighter way. So you can differentiate all the retouchings, but the conservators anticipate that in 10, 20, 100 years, these retouchings will age more similar like the original color tonality. So as it is, the less impact is our maxim. They do not want to do retouchings again. They do not want to remove them again. Every handling and touching a painting is again an intervention. So they make them more light.
In your experience, since you've done quite a few, how, just a very general time span range within which these retouchings do not require further intervention?
It depends on the quality of the material. Chinese acrylic paint has very bad acrylic content and most non-stable pigments. If you use watercolor pigments in a watercolor-based material, for example, imported from London, this retouching will fade because most of the pigments are not color fast. You have a severe problem by taking chemical products, as a chemically prepared paint, and retouch a la prima in one layer. You have to apply retouchings in different layers, and then, which is not easy, you have to adjust the surface coating. This means that the final glazing or resinous coating, varnish. And this last layer then again has to be according to the transparency of the paint, so that you can accomplish an integration. Retouching is not easy.
What material do you use to, paste it back?
We are using different materials according to the painting which we have to stabilize. There are wide ranges of materials, and only certain are suitable in Asia. Organic materials like glue are not suitable, but in Europe we are using fish glue coming from Russia, because, and you saw all the little bandages, they were glued with fish glue because it's a very elastic glue. It's a reversible glue. If you take a synthetic glue which is not developed for conservation, it is not reversible, and it might be too strong, so it pulls the paint layers apart. It is diluting the base. You have to choose the glue according to the material.
There used to be this dimer resin and beeswax which used to be mixed to repaste the paint back on the flaking paint.
Can you repeat this?
Dimer resin
yeah.
and beeswax mixed together.
Beeswax,
but it's not available now.
Beeswax is changing the tonality and is irreversible because you have a fat painting. And if you are using beeswax on a gouache painting, on a tempera painting, the painting is forever damaged.
The oil painting, the one with the...
beeswax is not to be recommended because you cannot remove the fat resinous residues from the cotton if you iron it in. You have to work with heat if you want to use beeswax. So it sinks, you melt it in, and then the painting is already discolored and fat.
I haven't used it because it's not available.
Oh, yeah, there are better methods to use, and only there where the paint is flaking. Never use a pot of beeswax and dissolve it in turpentine and then seal it in. You are causing more damages then. And beeswax is acidic as well. More questions?
Now, use newspaper in their work. Now, because they use it, they're almost 100 years old. How do you fit the records? How do you conserve that?
Newspaper is the cheapest paper pulp, of course. And if it is embrittled, it's mostly due to the acidity in the paper, and it's brown and it breaks. And the newspaper can only be kept as an archival piece. You can, of course, reline it with little hinges of Japanese or Chinese paper to reinforce it. But to put it on suction tables, to remove the acidity, this is for newspaper a much too intense process.
I have another question. I have seen professionally, over here I have seen in repairing manuscripts, people use toilet paper. I asked them why, and they said it has less acidity. Is that true?
But it has chlorine. It has a lot of chlorine. I would never recommend to use toilet paper. I would, indeed, that's what I did when I had no materials on a camp trip in Indonesia, and I had to secure important works. I bought cigarette paper, the little cigarette paper to roll your cigarettes. It's very thin, and we glued the cigarette paper with organic glue on all the flaking parts to transport the work. But it's only a preliminary way to keep paintings a little more stable for handling. More questions? Still in the mood to see the whole process of the Indian conservation? It's fascinating and it's more entertaining. It has music and a dynamic. Then I invite you and we can play this other film. How long is it?
It's 23 minutes, and it maps the process of the restoration and
Can I just, I unfortunately have to go, so I've got to pick somebody up. But I'm from the Sapumal Foundation.
Yeah.
And we have a problem with conservation.
Yeah. Nice to meet you finally. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could I give you my card and
You're
get
very
in touch with each other?
You're very welcome.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll
I
give you
do
my
the same.
card.
Thank you very much. Mr. De Souza, yeah? Yeah, yeah.